842 of the Bill and Joel Morning Show. This portion brought to you in part by University of North Georgia. Their annual Starlight Celebration is coming up Saturday, August 25th. Will you be there? Happens at their Gainesville campus, and gates open at 5:30. Fireworks at dark, and if you want to find out more, it's easy. Just visit ung.edu.
Let's bring on a guest for us here today. It's Jeff Clayton. He's executive director of the American Bail Coalition. Kind of interesting. I didn't know this was actually going on, so we're going to learn. I'm going to learn something here today, but we're going to talk about what is the fairest way to post bail for pretrial release as you go through putting together maybe your defense, etc. Because there are a couple things out there. One is a computerized risk assessment tool. And Jeff, we're glad you're on here to talk about this because I want to talk a little bit about this computerized risk assessment. Is it working?
Thanks for having me on, Bill. Well, the answer is we don't think so. In the last year, we realized that it doesn't have much success, and now, in light of the 115 civil rights groups coming out and saying that there's issues with racial discrimination, I think the jury's coming back on this finally.
And meaning that, I'm sorry, Bill, but meaning that the computer is running through a program that is supposed to analyze a person and go, okay, Bill's not dangerous, and then Bill gets out, but he really is dangerous, right? Or Joel is good, but he's not, and so you're releasing the wrong people and keeping the wrong people in. Is that what's happening with this?
Yeah, and the argument goes something like this, that Bill and Jeff are in there, and Bill is African-American and Jeff is white, and that these tools are going to over-recommend that Bill's risky versus Jeff. That's the issue that the 115 civil rights groups have raised.
Well, and there have been issues where this has done just that, not necessarily racially biased, but has led, as Joel was intimating, let folks who are really violent and should be locked up out when there are people who are not a flight risk or not a risk, have been kept in.
Yeah, we've seen that, and the big issue that we've seen nationally is that prior felons in possession of firearms are counted as low risk, and that doesn't pass the common sense test, but under the algorithm, it passes.
Who wrote this algorithm, for crying out loud? The inmates?
Yeah, right. No, the biggest one in use in the country was by the Laura and John Arnold Foundation. John Arnold was with Ken Lay at Enron, made Enron billions of dollars, and when he got out of Enron, he then made billions of dollars for himself.
We're talking with Jeff Clayton, executive director of American Bail Coalition. So, do you buy that it is racially profiling, so to speak, this computerized program? And then want to go into where the ACLU is, Bernie Sanders, and some other groups.
I buy that it could be, and I've certainly seen that happen. Is it not? We don't know. I think the potential is there, and the way I like to tell people is what this thing really does is it takes a picture of the way things are and forces judges to put people into those boxes. And so we're locking ourselves in the mentality of the way the system is right now, which I think everybody would argue is probably racially biased.
So then Bernie Sanders comes along, and he's introduced a bill in the Senate that would end bail on a national basis and switch to risk assessment tools. Well, let's talk about that a little bit. And what is the motive here for Mr. Sanders?
Well, we don't know for sure, but what I think is that running on bail reform and risk assessments is a democratic litmus test to get funding from major donors like guys like George Soros who support this movement. So I think that's what it's about. When Bernie announced this bill, we said, where have you been? All the other major Democratic viable candidates have already come out on this issue. So I think he just had to have credibility to run for president.
Gotcha. There you go. Well, there's always there is always sometimes an underlying
welcome to politics, right? Yeah.
Give us New Jersey, which banned bail last year, achieved their goal of reducing jail population, did they? But what happened in the long run?
Well, they reduced jail populations, but they actually reduced it less than they did last year during the first full year of bail reform. So they had a lot going on. Largely, it's because they're downgrading drug crimes, which is driving the problem. But the reality in New Jersey is they've implemented the system in January of 2017. They have no data on whether it actually worked, whether people are showing up for court or committing new crimes.
Our guest this morning is Jeffrey Clayton, Executive Director of the American Bail Coalition. And your organization, what would you recommend as far as any reforms, or if you just like the system the way it has been in the past?
No, I think there's a need for reform. It's mostly due process, meaning that you can't get in front of a judge and plead your case and have your bail reduced. That's the number one thing we see in the country. Number two is, we spend billions and billions of dollars on public defenders, but when it comes to bail, we don't spend really any money except we want to run people through a computer. we have 15,000 bail agents throughout the country. If we could find a way to allow some of these indigent parties to have access to bail, we don't have to trample their liberties, and they could probably get out of jail, and the system would work just fine.
But keeping a human involved in this, isn't that a good assessment of sometimes of people? I mean, because with the due process, aren't there a lot of checks and balances where we stand?
You'd think so, but we've seen cases where Galveston, Texas, you can't get in front of a judge for 30 days. Maurice Walker versus Calhoun, Georgia, down in Georgia. It took him 13 days to get in front of a judge on a charge of public intoxication, $160 bail. So you'd think there's robust due process in this country, but unfortunately there isn't, and that's something we need to work on.
Well, no doubt about that. If people want to follow this story and follow what's going on with this, and also follow what you folks do at the American Bail Coalition, how do they do that, Jeff?
Go AmericanBailCoalition.org or follow us on Twitter or Facebook.
Gotcha. I mean, this is an interesting story. I just didn't know it was out there, and it is something if corrective measures need to be taken, that's good, but we don't need to have yet another program which actually does more harm than good.
Right, and we got to remember this is about justice, not results.
Gotcha. All right, very good. Jeff, thanks for being with us on the program. Wish you a good weekend.
Thank you. You as well.
WDUN time coming up on 6:49 as we continue with the Bill and Joel Morning Show.
Let's check in now with Allison Shields from the Access WDUN Newsroom, driven by Milton Martin Honda.